The information provided on this podcast is not legal advice and is intended for the sole purpose of providing education and legal information. Laws change over time, and the information provided on this podcast may not be up to date. We make no warranty, express or implied, regarding the information provided by our team or our guests on this podcast. The information should not be construed as legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship with us or any of our guests on the podcast. If you would like to consult with an attorney, please call 1-800-VICTIMS. That's 1-800-842-8467 for attorney referral contact information. This podcast provides a platform for the exchange of ideas and information to help educate crime victims on their rights. Some content will include topics and materials that may involve descriptions of violence or assaults which can be distressing to victims and survivors. It may also impact service providers experiencing vicarious trauma. Podcasting from the Victims of Crime Resource Center, this is Season 2 of Knowledge is Power, Victim to Survivor, a podcast series where we help crime victims understand their rights so they can go from victims to survivors. On this episode, we'll discuss the services provided by Waymakers with Lita Mercado. Welcome in, everyone. It's me once again, your humble host, Nima Malavi with the Victims of Crime Resource Center. And today it's my pleasure to welcome Lita Mercado into the podcast. Lita is the Director of Victim Assistance Programs for Waymakers. Lita, thank you so much for coming on the podcast with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Nima. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Can you please share a little about the history and the mission of Waymakers?
Yes, absolutely. Waymakers was actually founded in 1972. We've been around for over 40 years and are a large nonprofit here in Orange County. We began our work actually by providing services to at-risk youth who were getting in trouble with the law and needed diversion programming. So our history is really rooted in youth violence prevention. But 6 years later, our victim assistance programs began. Along with the entire state of California, victim witness programs began emerging across the state. And since Waymakers was already established here in Orange County, we were lucky enough to get the contract for victim witness programming, which makes us really unique in that we are a nonprofit serving this community. We're actually only one of 2 counties in the entire state that provide victim witness services through a nonprofit. So our goal is to alleviate the trauma and devastating effects of crime victimization on our victims and survivors. But in addition to our victim assistance programs, we have broader nonprofit serving, continuing to serve the at-risk youth, and we also run youth shelters and provide counseling services for families in crisis. So we're lucky in the fact that even though I run the victim assistance programs and my unit is dedicated to that community, we have in-house other resources that can provide truly holistic services for families in need.
How long has Waymakers been in operation? I know you mentioned the 1970s, correct?
Yeah, so really over 40 years. And in 1978, we began our victim assistance programs. And our evolution has been, very exciting and unique in as much as a nonprofit, we have the flexibility to access funding and, create programming based on the needs of our community. So we have built additional uniquely designed programs throughout these decades. So in the 80s, we began a gang victim service unit to help provide services to victims of gang violence. Mm-hmm. In the 90s, we began our domestic violence program. In 2010, we began our human trafficking program. So over the decades, we've been able to add specialized units that really create specific programming and specific resources to victims of violent crime, depending on, what has happened to them or what community they belong to, really creating the best practice model for those clients who reach out to us to receive services.
That's wonderful. Well, so what benefits and services can crime victims receive when contacting Waymakers?
So we do provide the traditional victim witness program services, which include crisis intervention, helping clients understand what's happening in the criminal justice system. We do provide in-person accompaniment, and so we can go with clients to court. We've actually sat in the witness booth right beside them to support them in some cases. We provide accompaniment to forensic medical exams and to law enforcement interviews. Of course, doing a lot of resourcing and referring to other professionals that can assist. Some things that are more unique to our services than traditional victim witness is that we also do some what we call crisis response in the field. We have teams who are trained on providing death notifications. So law enforcement will use that team to help with delivering death notifications in a supportive and trauma-informed way. We have teams who will respond to family assistance centers when there are mass victimization incidents. So, for example, in February this year, we had a very large fire that burned down an entire apartment complex. The perpetrator, it was an arson, the perpetrator was arrested, but what occurred is a little over 100 people in the middle of the night in literally whatever they were wearing became homeless. So our crisis response team worked in conjunction with the Red Cross to staff the Family Assistance Center and ensure that all of those survivors were receiving support and continue to receive support from us.
Mm-hmm. Will audience members be responsible for paying any fees or any charges when receiving services from Waymakers?
No, absolutely not. We are fully funded to provide victim services for all victims of violent crime, and there are no requirements for any fees or charges.
Must victims meet any eligibility requirements to receive services from Waymakers?
So the only eligibility requirement is that they are a victim of a violent crime. There are certain programs that we have access to that have additional requirements. For example, the state's California Compensation Board, we do assist victims with applying to that program, and that particular program has some specific requirements with regards to cooperating with law enforcement and the like. But for Waymakers services, we simply need to know if there was a crime victimization that has occurred, and then we can insert services. And in some cases, we don't require even a police report. So, for example, our sexual assault program, we do not require that any type of report even have been made for a sexual assault survivor to access services. So depending on the scenario, we can be even more flexible with, how it's even determined that someone is a victim of a violent crime. We try to do that, in the most trauma-informed and victim-centered way, but that's really the minimum standard is, unfortunately, we're coming across folks, we reach out to folks and they reach out to us when something violent has happened to them or their family members, and we do everything that we can to assist from that point.
Are there any eligibility requirements based on the type of crime or the victim's income level?
No, so our services don't require any information on income level. They don't require any information on, immigration status, nothing of that type for Waymakers purposes. Again, we really just focus on if a violent crime has occurred, we fold in to do an assessment to determine what the victim survivor may need, what they want, and what we have the ability to provide them with. There are, again, some programs that do require some information on income and documentation status, and we explore those as we explore any option. But to receive services from Waymakers, such as our crisis intervention and our resources and accompaniment, all we need to know is if this is a victim of a violent crime, and we're able to fold in automatically regardless of any other information.
I see. So you mentioned, I know before in a previous answer, that Waymakers provides community-based help, but can you explain, is it a government-based organization or is it a community-based organization?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. So we are a community-based organization. Now, and so as a nonprofit, we're able to access funding in a wide variety of ways. We do receive government funds. So the
Mm-hmm.
California Office of Emergency Services, for example, they fund victim witness programs across the state, and we are the implementing agency for that grant. So we do have government-based grant funding, but as a nonprofit, as I mentioned before, we have an enormous amount of flexibility to go beyond what government funding could allow. For example, the our sexual assault program, for example,
Mm-hmm.
we're able to extend a prevention program that is not government funded, and be able to seek opportunities to grow that program to create, a safer environment in Orange County. We do awareness presentations. We've created
Mm-hmm.
public service campaigns. So we're definitely community based, which makes us certainly unique from our sister agencies.
I see why you say that. Yeah, that's a very interesting dynamic between being a community based organization and also providing traditionally what would be government services with victim assistance type help. From a victim standpoint, what are the pros and cons between contacting a government based organization and then contacting a community based organization?
Sure. Well, it probably is not surprising to know that I think there are a lot of pros to
Mm-hmm.
contacting a community-based agency. So I'll start with that in the sense, beyond what I've shared already before in terms of funding, that does impact victim services because we are able to create specific victim units, as I mentioned before. So what we're able to do is we're able to hire staff specifically for a victim population. So I'll use our gang victim services as an example. So
Mm-hmm.
we have a unit of bilingual staff, bilingual Spanish English and Vietnamese English, and they are specifically hired and trained to provide a really unique service to victims of gang violence. And while this doesn't always mean that the crime victimization is happening in uh, gang prone communities, it does happen often. And so these amazing people are trained. They're trained in understanding these communities that are significantly impacted by gangs in their community. So if someone is a victim of gang violence, what does it mean for them to cooperate with law enforcement but still live in the community where other gang members may still be on the streets and live
Mm-hmm.
next door to them. And so we have uniquely trained folks who can work in that community, who build relationships. They do a lot of field work. As a matter of fact, that's the team that also provides death notifications, because what we've
Mm-hmm.
learned is often law enforcement and communities in gang crimes, the communities don't want to speak to law enforcement for a wide variety of reasons. And inserting a community-based team that it doesn't work for law enforcement. We don't work for the DA's office. We don't work for the government. We just go in there, and our entire purpose is to provide services to the victim and the community. So we can work with the victims and their surviving family members, and they're able to feel safe in doing so because they're not seen as talking to the police. And so this
Mm-hmm.
creates a safer environment. And as a nonprofit, we're able to do that where, my sister victim witness programs don't have that advantage because even though they work for victim services, they have a county badge and they do work for the government. And it does change the relationship between the community and the service providers. So we're really grateful for for that advantage. We also have family justice centers. We have two in Orange County. So we have staff that are located inside those centers. And it creates this really wonderful collaborative working relationship between us and our law enforcement partners, us and the DA's office. And so we're really able to have the best of both worlds, right? We don't work, we don't work for law enforcement or the DA's office. And so often that helps to alleviate some concerns that our victims may have, again, for a wide variety of reasons. But we're able to negotiate access to information from our law enforcement partners and our DA's office, so victims aren't left totally without information. But before I came to Waymakers, I worked for a rape crisis center in another county, community-based, wonderful, amazing program. And when I started working at Waymakers, I saw right away the advantages of our public-private partnerships with our teams, because before at the Rape Crisis Center, we didn't have this relationship with law enforcement or the DA's office. So there was a lot of hesitancy to share information with us, which then meant that our victims didn't have access to information. But now that I'm here with Waymakers and we do have these positive relationships, we're able to get police reports, sent to the state in a way that I wasn't able to do before. We're able to get court status updates and regularly communicate with the DA's office to, determine restitution. So it really is, a blessing down here in Orange County that we have these relationships that truly, began in the early 70s. And so at this point, we're just taking advantage of these long-standing traditions of collaborative work. And I would say the cons may just simply be in authority. There is a power differential between, myself and my nonprofit staff and our county our county DA's office and law enforcement, right? I can't call up my DA's office or law enforcement and, say I need them to do something. I have no authority over them. So the power differential can be complicated, but I honestly am not sure that that's any different than a county-based program. And so I don't think that there's a true disadvantage in that. And if there is any, it's definitely, over the fact that we have a relationship with the DA's office and law enforcement. It definitely takes precedence, and we're able to get a lot of assistance and support for our clients in ways that I think those people who are only in a nonprofit that don't work collaboratively with their government agencies and in a better way than those agencies that are just government based.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I certainly see the advantage, especially in the example you provided with a victim of, let's say, gang violence, and how it could be a tremendous benefit in being a community-based organization. I think it was a very wonderful example that you provided there. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all the time we have for today's episode. Please join us on our next episode for part 2 of the discussion. Thanks for listening. Now that you've heard the show, please take a moment to rate and review it. And if you have any questions about any of the information you heard today, you can reach the Victims of Crime Resource Center at 1-800-842-8467. Or you can reach us online at 1-800-VICTIMS.org or Facebook at Victims of Crime Resource Center, or Twitter at 1-800-VICTIMS. If you haven't had a chance, please take a look at some of the other episodes in our series. Thanks for listening.